Welcome back to With the Chiefs. This week is the 6th episode in the Become a Better Runner series. Today we are joined by the ever knowledgeable running coach, Sally Coggins. Sally is a champion and was mentioned in Turbo's episode for rescuing him from some dark places during his 100-kilometre run around his block. She was also mentioned in Nico's episode as she's the coach of Nico, and Nico is currently training for his sub-3-hour marathon in Orange. Sally is also a bit of a weapon runner herself. She's an absolute student of the sport and has dealt with and learnt a lot from some terrible running experiences, both physical and mental, but has taken her studious approach to get to the bottom of these problems and come back from them stronger than ever. Watching Sally finish an emotional UTA 100 last year gave me goosebumps, knowing she'd gone through so much to get to where she was and to finish the race. We figured that with all her wisdom and running experience, it'd be worthwhile catching up with her today to discuss the next topic in the Become a Better Running series, which is how can data be used to analyze your training and take you to the next level? So welcome to the show, Sally.
Thanks. Thanks for the intro, man.
Welcome,
I just got
Sally.
Goosebumps thinking about UTA finishes again.
Oh yeah, wow. That was pretty special.
That'll be you this year though, man.
I hope so. Yeah, my God. What have you been up to at the moment? What's going on?
Oh, lots. Probably actually not quite as much running as I'd hoped, but I've been a little bit sidetracked the last sort of 2 months just getting ready for I sort of co-race directed an event. I had to get my hiking fitness up to scratch though, because it's a beast of a course. There's about 5,700 meters over the 100k distance of the Blackberries out. So we were spending like 10 to 12 hour days out there just clearing the course and marking and like getting it all sorted. And then it was amazing. Lots of sleep deprivation for about a week, and I feel like I've only really just resurfaced this week. I think I've been for one run, but that was sort of a big priority for the first part of this year. So I've sort of sidelined my specific running goals at the moment to get that under my belt. And then life's just been pretty busy on a lot of other fronts though. And I think, the last 6 months has been me needing to pay attention to some of those other areas of life and then hopefully reset for something bigger at the end of this year.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty special race. I didn't know the background to it. That sounds really cool. It sounds like
it's been going for about 6 years, and so Andy and Michelle are the couple that run the event, and it started off as a 3-day hike, so you can still do it as a 3-day event. You camp out at 2 different sort of aid stations, and really the concept is to push you well outside your comfort zone, because that's essentially where kids with autism are on a daily basis. And this course definitely does that. There's some incredibly experienced ultra runners that came very much unstuck, and it happens every year. You're racing cutoffs even with a lot of experience. So if you're looking for a big event and to get into some of the most spectacular ridgelines in Australia, I can definitely recommend this event.
Yeah, no, it sounds awesome. Usually at the start of each episode, we just talk about our training and what we've been up to in the past week. So I think you mentioned you hadn't done a lot of running, but what did
I've done a 10K run.
Like? Oh, okay.
The last week has looked like me trying to sleep, catch up on work and eat. And then, I've done a little 10K run just to sort of get the cobwebs out, and we'll look to sort of reset a bit more this week. I'm back at the gym tomorrow, and looking forward to sort of getting strong and fit again. I think race entries open for Blackwall 100 this week. So I suspect I will be signing up for that in October.
Awesome.
How about you guys?
Yeah, Smitty, what about you?
Okay, Dom, I've already talked to you about this, but I've had a shocker of a week, in the sense that I did my easy running, but I missed all the sessions due to the rain. I don't know if it's a good enough excuse, to tell you the truth, but on Wednesday, I was meant to do a speed session. On Saturday, I was meant to do like some threshold work, but I'm still quite happy that I got like a solid long run in on Sunday, and I just worked in 2x5K. So maybe I rescued the week, I hope, but hopefully next week I'll be focusing, well, this week, just, doing a few of the sessions and getting that as the focus. But still not a horrible week, but I don't like to cancel too many runs, but it happens, I guess.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's not too bad to have a down week. Like everyone's pretty obsessed with just smashing the sessions all the time, and I think that's not always the best thing to do. Like there's nothing wrong with missing a few sessions.
Yeah, I think we can be a little bit hard on ourselves sometimes, but when you set the training week on the Sunday in the calendar, you want to hit it. I guess because I was reflecting back on training, being like, there's probably no point. Like if I'm going to miss any sessions, I'm probably better off missing like maybe 1 or 2 easy runs as opposed to the key sessions, is my thoughts.
Yeah.
However, it's still okay. I mean, being out there running is always good regardless, so I can't complain.
Yeah, you got something done. I think you need to respect the environmental conditions a bit too. Like, it's been raining, but like it's really been raining.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I get in my head a little bit. We need to respect, the environmental factors a little bit more. But I guess that was my thoughts on the week. What about you, Dom?
Yeah, it was a bit of a down week for me actually as well. I think after the past 2 weeks, I was just going too hard. And on the Monday after, we ran from Wynyard to Manly with a few other turbo runners. And the next day I just felt absolutely wrecked. And I even like went and saw a doctor and stuff. I felt that tired. And so.
Well done for getting a checkup.
Yeah, I don't know. It was pretty bad. Actually, my pee was a little bit red, and I think that it's never a good thing to be having red pee. So I don't know. I felt just a bit tired. Took a few days off, and some tests have been sent off. So I think it's all good. I think it's fairly common for runners that are overtraining to have that happen to them. So I think it should be okay. I feel fine otherwise. So
I think there's sort of 2 edges to that one. Like either you're in rhabdo and it's not a great idea because you're probably shredding your kidneys if you keep running, or your bladder's just a bit irritated physically from the friction of running so much, and that's probably less of an issue. But I'm not a doctor, but you definitely don't want to keep running if your pee changes color like that. So you've done absolutely the right thing getting it checked out.
Yeah, I kind of just took it back a bit, and I still did a few sessions and had to go at the 440, but it was just I don't know. I felt like I was decreasing the load a lot, and I felt like it was under control. So then I was feeling good again by Saturday morning, and I had to go at the 440 and broke the record on the 440, which is good. I think sometimes a few days down is not a bad thing. So that was my week pretty much. Now it's kind of just start tapering and get ready for 6 foot.
It's gonna be massive. What was how we describe that fatigue after a long run sometimes, when we say we go like 33, 35K, was what you were feeling like a next level to that? Like maybe times by 2 or
just I don't know, more so like the day after I just felt really like foggy and just like when you can't think straight, like I don't know, I'm sure we've all felt it before when like the day after a big race or you've just absolutely spent yourself, you take about twice as long to do any sort of cognitive task. And I just felt, this isn't great. So, and obviously the peeing blood is also not good. So
well, sorry to make you dwell on that, Dom.
That's right.
The glory of running.
It can be
such a glamorous sport.
Interesting when you take it to that level. It's like the border between healthy, it's like you're doing it for physical health, and then sometimes it's like we blur that line a little bit.
We definitely do.
Dom, sorry. I guess where we wanted to start, or maybe it's a tricky way to start, but for example, if someone comes to you and they want to sort of get into a program, what's your starting point with them, would you say, in terms of how you look at developing something for them?
Sorry, me or Dom? Yeah, look, I guess there's a lot of things that you'll sort of take into account when sort of taking on a new client, particularly if they're sort of newer to running. But I think really what it boils down to is going to be, you need to meet them where they're at, which isn't always where they think they're at. And I think getting everyone on the same page there can be sort of the first step. Then you really kind of need to get an objective idea of what it is that they're shooting for in the short, sort of medium and long term. And then it's really my job to figure out what sort of time frame we're going to need to take to get them safely from where they're at to where they want to get to, and whether that time frame necessarily fits with sort of a goal that they've already got. If they've signed up for a race and it's going to be too big a stretch, then sometimes we need to sort of have a chat about, injury risk is going to be too steep, or, if they don't actually have a set goal, then it's starting to maybe find a few intermediate things to work towards, if they enjoy having sort of something on the horizon. But just getting a feel for how they're responding to training is really kind of the first step for me. But yeah, I think also just making sure that their goals align. I think you hear a lot of people, and I'm one of them, that, says running's really important to me. I like to do it as much as I can, and I want to be running till I'm old. But then they've signed up for 3 ultras in 3 months and started running 6 months ago, and you're like, well, maybe we just need to kind of rework that a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. So yeah, I guess it's just, having that bigger picture approach. And, humans are capable of some really incredible things, but to do it sustainably and not to sort of slip over that knife edge into running being, negative for us and detrimental to us. I think it's helpful to have sort of a coach on board to try and sort of keep that bigger picture stuff in check.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's super objective and super subjective as well.
Everyone's so different. Yeah, so that's why it's a bit of a loaded question. Yeah. But, if we could generalize, that's a good way to sum it up.
I think it's kind of like life though. Like, it's like your 5-year goals. They say people always underestimate what they can achieve in 5 years, but overestimate what they can achieve in, I don't know, the short term.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I guess some of the things we wanted to go a little bit deeper on was, like, for example, if someone's listening to this and they don't understand sort of the different types of running, we wanted to go into, like, for example, what is easy running? What are different sessions? So if we could start with easy running and see how you define that, for example, and then maybe just step through the different kinds of running you would go through in a program.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, look, I think, easy running is really important. It's something that I think we all kind of need to be doing, but I do think that a lot of people get it wrong. I think a lot of people run their easy runs too hard, and it's important to sort of figure out that balance, and it's a hard one to know intrinsically yourself, especially if you're sort of newer to running. Yeah. I think easy runs are important because they're going to build your aerobic fitness, but they also are really important at conditioning your bones and your tendons and your muscles to the sort of concussive, repetitive load that is running. And we need to be building that load consistently if we're going to get our bodies to adapt. I think where a lot of sort of people new to running and old to running really is that the cardiovascular fitness tends to come before the bone adaptation and tendon adaptation. And so it's quite easy to build fitness and think that things are going well and then inadvertently overdo it. So yeah, I think there's lots of different ways you can sort of try and put metrics around that. And if I've got really robust, power data on an athlete I've been working with for a while, then I'll get quite precise about the intensity there. But I think the biggest sort of rule of thumb for me that rings true is what your breathing's doing. And for me, easy long runs, you should be able to do nasal breathing. So as soon as you open your mouth, you're going too fast. And as soon as you open your mouth, it really changes what your physiology is doing too. So that's probably my big take home in terms of easy runs, is that you should be using your nose.
Wow, that's a great way to think of it. I've never thought of it like that. And that would you can tell. Like you can tell when, for example, you're on a midweek long run and you sort of want to take it easy, and there's there's a very fine line between like, am I going too fast? Because maybe you're looking at Strava and you're like, oh, I just want to hit this pace, for example, which is not good.
No. I love Strava so much.
Do we have to delete Strava?
Can you see my eyes roll?
It's bad in that way because you lose track.
Don't delete Strava. Yeah, it's just don't bring an ego to the table.
I know it's difficult. It's like I want to hit 4:18 average on this run, but that's not very productive for the most part.
And I guess that's probably going to feed into the metrics that I use, and I'm sure we'll probably get into that. But yeah, I think nasal breathing is a big one to practice as well. It just changes how your body is utilizing the oxygen, but also how you're dealing with carbon dioxide. And I think it really helps to build that aerobic fitness if you can sort of keep things proper, relaxed, and it'll feel really slow initially. You can sort of realistically, I find, because it does take a bit of time for you to warm up aerobically and to get that system really firing efficiently, you can probably stretch to inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. But after you settle into that sort of intensity, you should be able to eventually breathe in and out through your nose.
I think I've tried it and it felt uncomfortable. Maybe that's because I was going too fast.
Probably.
But it felt like almost scary. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's often like how your physiology is dealing with the carbon. So it's something that does take practice, and you can train that definitely as well. So, you can increase the intensity you can hold with nasal breathing. But, I think for people that are starting out to running, it's easy runs for me often even need to be a bit slower than conversational pace. They need to be nasal breathing.
Okay. Wow. That's great distinction. What's the next classification for you?
Well, I guess then some kind of interval, which I think, you've probably spoken to, interval structures a little bit in the past, but I think really it's about that variability of training stimulus that's probably the most important. You can have lots of different shapes and forms of intervals, whether they're short sprints, whether they're sort of a couple of minutes, whether they're hills, whether they're undulating fartlek sort of style intervals. There's lots of different ways you can sort of splice intensity into training, but I think the biggest thing is the fact that there is some variability, particularly early on in a build. For me, I like to sort of make sure that we're using all of the tools that are available to us, because I think it not only helps to train your sort of metabolic energy system, so getting used to how your body needs to find energy when you're above threshold, so more those anaerobic kind of efforts, but you're also recruiting different types of muscles and different range of motion of your joints. So often when we're running faster, we tend to hold better form, and we're sort of, moving our hips through sort of wider ranges of motion, and our knees and our ankles. It breaks up the monotony of what is essentially an incredibly monotonous sport. If we're just literally running slow and long all of the time, we're really just training our bodies to run slow and long and probably break because we're doing too much of it. So I really like intervals. I think they're a really important thing to start integrating if you want to increase your running capacity. And they're also quite helpful tools in terms of building strength. If we're going to do sort of hill sprints, and that's running up the hills and down the hills, I think people forget to practice running hard down hills. But I think then the duration and the intensity is also a tool to help us lift threshold to build speed, or I guess it just depends on what the specific focus is for that run, if they're targeting 5k or a half marathon, or where they're at in their build. But some kind of interval I think is always really important.
Do you have a Do you have a go-to, like if you were to only have one session to train intervals, is there a go-to, or is that too much?
Yeah, no.
Okay, no go-to.
I'm just not, I just
Not
think
about that.
everyone's so different.
Yep.
You know, I think working through your standard kind of intervals is always a nice progression. So, you know, 100 meter, 200 meter, 400 meter, 800 meter, 1K. If you were to sort of cycle through those and sort of gradually build the duration of interval over a series of a couple of months, then that's rarely going to hurt anyone and probably contribute to most kind of distances. But yeah, there's no one specific session. It's more just do something different once a week and push your heart rate up a little bit and then recover and push it a bit harder again. It's that dance, I think, above and below threshold that's important, because it teaches your body how to recover as well, which is super important when we start talking about like actual race sort of strategy and things as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So then the next is
what's the next run
would be
if I'm getting
threshold,
like
is it?
I reckon you know, threshold's important to practice, and again there's like lots of work that can be done usually just a little bit below your true threshold. I think then the question comes down to, well, what is your threshold and how do you actually measure that or figure out where that line is? And it's a shifting line. It's always going to be adapting to your training, but you know, that's again where breathing effort can give you a bit of a cue. Once you sort of start breathing quite hard, that's probably when you're approaching that sort of second or that lactate threshold. For me, that's where power as a metric comes to the fore, because it correlates really well with sort of lactate threshold. But really it's sort of finding that edge of it being uncomfortable and then holding it is kind of what threshold feels like. It's, you can feel that kind of panic of, this hurts and I don't want to do it, but it's kind of just okay that I can keep holding on. And I think doing some threshold work is important to sort of build your fitness and ideally lift your threshold, which will ultimately mean that you can run faster, more efficiently. So if your lactate threshold has gone up over the course of a training block, it means your easy running can be done slightly quicker because your capacity is increased. So it's quite a helpful tool, but nobody really enjoys doing it. So if you haven't written that session into your program, you're probably not going to spontaneously go, oh, I'm just going to go out and do some threshold intervals.
It's because they're like hard and prolonged.
They suck.
And
people say it's like it's meant to be comfy, but it's not comfy.
Like, it's not comfy.
What is it like? When we were looking at that book, Dom, I think the way you described threshold was it's like comfortably hard or something like that, and I was like, I don't.
Doesn't really make
hard.
sense.
It's very difficult to distinguish.
I think it really is that edge before you bail. And finding it, and I think it takes practice. Like your true threshold is probably gonna be, you can probably hold an intensity for longer than you realize if this is the first threshold session you've done ever or for the last 6 months. I think your body needs time to practice, you know, running at that effort. And so, you know, break it down and, you know, start off with like a 3 minute on, 3 minute off, and then increase the number of minutes that you're sort of holding that. I think there's, lots of ways to slice it, but usually I want to sort of start to pitch towards like an 8 to 12 minute kind of interval if we're going to do actual threshold intervals, or I guess more your sort of 5K race pace is kind of another way to get a bit of a feeling for the interval intensity, but it sort of depends how quickly you run 5 and 10K really. That's why, again, it's so subjective, and that's again why I like other metrics like power to dictate that.
That's a good point. I remember when I started running with Dom, and very, very obviously new to running and not knowing all of these sort of different paces. I know it's like almost like you develop that feeling for your own body, like that understanding over time. If you start doing specific work at that pace, you sort of just learn, but it is probably hard to describe, which is where the metrics then come in.
100%. And I think that's a big thing for sort of people that are new to running is you're not used to what that feels like and how much it can hurt.
Yeah.
And how much you actually don't die though. And you need to do that a few times to sort of start pushing the envelope a little bit. And so I think, yeah, metrics can be helpful, but in terms of just rough brush strokes, it's pushing to that edge of discomfort that you can still sustain, and then just inching up how long you're holding it for, at that session each week.
Yeah, I have just a little thought. Threshold, because for example, half marathon pace was meant to be sort of at threshold pace. And it's funny, in training, threshold feels like you wouldn't be able to hold it for that long, anywhere near that long, but there's something about getting in a race that makes it different.
I think in terms of what again, there's so many different definitions of what threshold actually is, and so what pace you should be holding for a race. For me, I probably come at it a little bit differently, like true lactate threshold. I think sort of half marathon, if you're really well trained for it, but it is probably going to take a couple of years to be at the point where you can truly run a half marathon at threshold. And I think it is a sliding scale. Like, for me, threshold at the moment, given that I've done no speed work for a while, because I'm sort of coming back into training at the moment, my threshold is probably going to be 4:30s, whereas Dom's threshold is going to be considerably quicker than that, and yours too. So
3:26 for Dom, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, when you sort of stack that up in terms of what does that actually look like as kilometers, for me, there's no way 21.1 kilometers at that pace is really sustainable. I think threshold is actually more, you have your threshold, but then you can train your time to exhaustion at that threshold. And those are the sort of sliding scale metrics that I look at from a data statistics perspective. Is just because your threshold is at that certain point, if we haven't trained you to be able to hold it for longer and longer, then your threshold might only last for 15 minutes, which is not going to get you through a half marathon.
So that becomes relevant
very
quickly.
That's a very good point.
So
like,
a lot of
you can't actually put like a time to it, say this is how long you should be able to hold your threshold, because it's changing all the time.
And it's adapting to your training as well. And I think that's again why I have come more and more back to particularly power being a metric for that, and using what we call a power duration curve model, which has kind of evolved more from the cycling sort of realms, and now come across to running now that the technology's sort of caught up. But really it's about modeling what our physiology is doing based on the inputs that we've been giving it. And it means you do need to be testing the barriers and doing sort of some frequent time trialing to keep figuring out where that limit is. But it's an evolving beast, and it will change for the individual over the course of that training block and over the course of years as well. So it's a hard one to pin down.
Absolutely. What's an ideal time trial? Is it like just any type of race?
For me, like, I actually think it's more important to be building out time trialing over lots of different distances. So if I'm trying to sort of, I guess, keep my data in check from a power sort of perspective, I'll often be throwing in, and it doesn't have to be that frequently, but probably on a 90-day kind of cycle, I'll want my athletes to have done some sprints, like literally some 8-second kind of max effort, a 1 minute kind of max effort, 5 minute, 10 to 15 minute, a 5K and a 10K will often sort of work their way in there. So hitting those kind of all out efforts at the really short end and the medium sort of end helps to give us a bit of a gauge for where threshold's sitting. And that's ultimately going to dictate then, pacing strategies for, my bend is generally the longer stuff. I'm usually working with people that are targeting, half marathon and above, and often sort of more the ultra kind of trail distances. And I think it's just as important to know what threshold is, because you need to dance quite a lot below that if you want to keep running for 100 Ks. And so if you're going 100 Ks or you're going 100 meters, it's an important kind of metabolic threshold to be aware of. Okay,
cool. What do you think about long runs, and are they done at easy pace for the most part, or is I would imagine it would vary quite a bit depending on the
Yeah,
distance.
yeah, it varies a lot on, I guess, probably the athlete's running age, like how new to running they are or how seasoned they are at running, where in the sort of preparation we are. I think, earlier on, it is more, I guess, what we'd historically kind of term that base building stuff. Really, it's just time on feet at a comfortable pace. And I think, going long for a comfortable at a comfortable pace is more important than trying to hit a target pace for your long runs. I think, though, as you approach an event, particularly if you've got a time goal in mind for that, you need to practice running at that intensity. So your long runs are going to be geared more towards race specificity, and that's not just the pace that you're holding, but the surface that you're running on as well. Like if you're gearing up for, like Nico Orange Marathon in a week, like it's road surfaces that you want to be training on. Whereas if you've signed up for UTA 50K or 100K, like you really need to be doing your long runs on terrain specific to that, because it's building the memory in your legs as to what that terrain feels like and what you need to recover and adapt to doing that. But it's also exposing you to a lot of other things that are really important on race day, like how do you sort of negotiate obstacles and things, particularly with trails. Like you need to get your eye in for running on an uneven terrain. You need to get used to, what the sort of temperatures get to when you're out there running for that period of time. Snakes, running out of water. If you're running roads, don't get hit by a car. Like, don't trip over the freaking gutter.
These are all considerations.
They are. And I think probably more importantly, it's like what the elevation gain is over that distance as well for your long run. So, road marathons in general will lend themselves to being flatter, but there are some that have still got, a moderate amount of elevation gain, or there may be a distinct hill at a specific part of the course where you may benefit from, studying that course and going, okay, well, where are those sort of hills, or where are the pressure points, and practicing that in training. Like do a long run, but make sure you hit a hill sort of toward the end of that to get practiced at what that feels like. And if you're training for trails, then yeah, definitely, if you can get as specific to the elevation gain as possible, ideally on the course, but otherwise look at that average elevation gain. I'll often break that down in terms of meters of elevation per kilometer and try and match that with my long runs, particularly in that sort of 8 to 10 weeks out from race day, those sort of back end long runs. It's really important to get as specific as you can.
Yeah, geez.
I think
it's like you've thought of everything.
Like Dom and I were looking at Nico's long runs. They look incredible.
Yeah.
I was super excited to see you.
Yeah.
I just wanted for Nico to find a start line finally. Between COVID and everything else that's been going on.
I know.
Yeah, I'm stoked. He's just had such an awesome prep, and I'm super proud of the work he's put in, and I can't wait to see what he can execute on the weekend.
Yeah. It was pretty interesting, I thought, that you mentioned, like snakes or water and hydration, and you brought that up along as important as making sure you hit the right splits or whatever, or run on the hills. Like I think that it seems like that's one of the things about you. You're so thorough and analytical about everything, and even like when it comes down to gearing ultra, I imagine that's
you need to be really confident with your gear. I think if you're listening and you've sort of signed up for trail ultras, it's really important to be training with all your mandatory gear for your long runs. Get used to carrying those packs, get used to how much you drink naturally in that sort of environment, and get an idea of, because it's a really fine balance in ultras as to, you don't want to carry more weight than you have to, but you don't want to run out of water 10Ks before the next aid station and come in completely cooked.
So
there's a lot of extra strategy, and I think a lot of that comes from me learning the hard way with a lot of things. But I've seen many people come unstuck for lots of different reasons, and workshopping that stuff's really important. So even if you don't have a coach, I think, you know, having some brainstorming sessions with people that have done the distances that you're gearing up for is really important. Like, you know, how do you manage blisters? Which bits are going to rub? Like, when do you need to reapply sunscreen? There's like so many things, you know, there's people that will pull out of races often due to environmental things. They overcook, and there's lots of things you can do to try and mitigate that, and a lot of it has nothing to do with how your long runs looked sort of in
like we tend to focus on just the running and like the physiology,
the stats, the Ks,
but like all that stuff is
tip
also
of the iceberg. I mean, it's a really important tip. Like, you've got to do the running, but I think the longer things get and the more remote it gets, the more you need to learn how to look after yourself and problem solve. And that's ultimately what I find so alluring about trail ultras, is you literally never know what you're going to get on race day, and it's kind of almost the joy of finding the first snag and then figuring out how you're going to workshop it on the go and not let it undo you. I think ultras really are just an exercise in making good decisions for yourself time and time and time and time again until you find that finish line. Yeah,
that's a really good way to put it. And yes, getting back on track then.
Yes.
So yeah, we've mentioned metrics quite a bit already. But there's probably, I don't know, a few different metrics that I can think of off the top of my head that people tend to kind of follow when they're running. So typically heart rate, perceived effort, time or pace, and then also power, which you use quite a bit. It's probably a good idea to just kind of go into each one and maybe talk a bit about the pros and cons of each of them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I guess the first thing I'd say is, although power is definitely my preferred metric for intensity, it's not that I ignore all of those other things. I think all of them have importance, and those will be more important or less important depending on the goal and, you know, where the individual's at. I think, you know, in terms of heart rate, it's a great starting point. I think any metric that's getting you more in touch with your body and your physiology is a really, you know, important tool. I think anything that's distracting you from being in tune with yourself, I put a bit of a flag on. So I think, you know, when it comes to heart rate, it's really good to get an idea of what your heart rate is doing sort of at threshold, or what your max heart rate is, or what your resting heart rate is doing, and tracking those trends can be really important. And training to heart rate zones is a really good sort of initial, I guess, sort of starting point for those sort of key intensities that will apply to training. I think where heart rate gets a bit limited is it's quite influenced by a lot of external factors. So, you know, I have had 3 long blacks today. My heart rate is probably going to be a little bit higher than if I haven't had any caffeine in my system. You know, I know from my Coros data that I was super sleep deprived for a week, and my resting heart rate's definitely gone up with that. I know when I'm stressed, it's going to go up. So heart rate can be a bit more variable. I think there's also a lag with heart rate. So if you're sort of focusing on shorter intervals, you know, if you're doing 10-second all out sprints, your heart rate's not going to have peaked until you've already started recovering from that. So you don't have sort of immediate feedback on sort of shorter distance sprints as well. But it's a really important thing to be cognizant of, because, you know, yes, although I tend to use power more as my metric, if I'm out in a race and I'm holding the power that should be ideal for me and my heart rate's going up, then that's a cue to me to go, well, what do I need to assess here? Am I getting too hot? Am I dehydrated? Do I need to eat more? Like what's causing that other metric to shift? So I think you need to sort of have a feeling for all of them, and heart rate's still a good place to start, but you need to recognize the limitations of it. I think, you know, when it comes to perceived effort, that's another really valuable one. And I probably value RPE more than heart rate, particularly with the type of athletes that I'm dealing with that are shooting for the super long stuff. Because, you know, we can train to the ideal of what we want to sort of, I guess, manifest, but as we've mentioned, there's lots of things that can start to go wrong over the course of a day on trail, or, you know, even with long sort of road runs. And I think sort of getting an idea of, well, this is feeling really hard now. Should it feel this hard? And again, it's just a way to sort of check yourself mid-race. But in terms of training intensity, I think it's a really good starting point as well. I think the limitations there probably come back to what we spoke to earlier, which is, you know, for a lot of beginner runners, they don't actually know what a 9 feels like what's 9 out of 10 for someone who's just started running versus a 9 out of 10 for Usain Bolt. They're going to be very different in terms of, you know, what that actually looks like, and it's trainable. But I think RPE is a great go-to metric because you're unlikely to overdo it. So for me, it's more that you know, the majority of novice runners that I start working with, I know they can probably push harder if we practice them running at intensity more. And that's sort of a skill that they want to acquire because they want to do a faster 5K. But I'm unlikely to overcook them by saying do a 7 out of 9 here and a 9 out of 9 here. So they get a feel again for how their body feels. And so I think it is a way of getting more in tune with your body. I think the longer you've been running, though, the more intuitive you are with that sort of stuff. And so it probably becomes even more powerful for really seasoned runners because you just know what that should feel like in your body. You know what threshold should feel like. You know what your sort of long run should feel like. I think, though, again, coming back to something we touched on earlier, which was ego, that's probably the flip side to RPE is if you're running in a group and you don't want to get dropped and you know it's meant to be easy and you're like, well, I can still talk, so this is fine. Like RPE is a bit of a sliding scale in that regard. Like you can probably overdo it a little bit in those instances. But I really like RPE, and as I said, I still use it a lot, but I probably use it more to fine tune, you know, the power side of things. And then pace, I think, you know, again, it comes back to the style of race that you're targeting. Like for Nico, there's a very clear goal, like it needs to be sub 3. And the numbers stack up in terms of that being definitely achievable based on, you know, all the power data and stuff that we've built up on Nico. So that's not a reach for him. I think he's trained his body meticulously now for a couple of years to get to that point. And whereas if I decided that I wanted a sub 3 and gave myself 6 months to get there, there's no way I'm going to achieve that because I've got a pretty good feeling of where I'm at right now, and it's not at sub 3. But I think pace can let you down a little bit because it's almost, I guess that's probably the main metric that I think pulls people away from where their body's at. So it's very easy for your head to get involved, and again, your ego to probably get involved and go, okay, well, I want to do a race at this time, therefore my long runs need to be this divided by that, and this is my pace. If your body isn't ready for that, then you really massively increasing your injury risk because you're chasing what you've perceived is what you should be doing before your body's actually trained itself to be ready to handle it. So I get a little bit nervous about getting too prescriptive with paces unless I'm working with someone who we've been training together for a while and we've got a good handle on where they're at. And yes, on race day, pace is going to be the thing that Nico's probably going to pay more attention to. But he's also got a good idea of what power he wants to stay under, or he's going to risk blowing himself up if he's sort of going a bit harder up a hill or those sorts of things. So yeah, I think pace is super helpful too, but just be cognizant of the fact that it's easy to, I guess, be a bit too ambitious with your training, and probably set yourself up to be overtraining and doing way too many efforts above where your body's ready, and you're probably going to, you know, struggle to recover from that. You're going to increase your injury risk, and it's also really hard to keep up with that from a food and eating and general sort of life recovery perspective if you're training above the level that you're, you know, quite ready for. And then power, which is where I have landed. And again, like power, like there's no perfect metric out there, but I think for me, power is the thing that most reliably and objectively quantifies the stress that we are applying to our bodies. And it correlates the strongest to lactate threshold. So when we're using power over a period of time, it can become a really helpful tool in terms of pacing training intensities, predicting race outcomes. So I can get a pretty good idea of where someone's at in terms of what their half marathon time is going to be, or what their marathon time is going to be at their current threshold. Then it's just, can they hold it for that long? Do we just need to train out the duration, or are they falling short of that bar? And do we need to do a threshold block initially to sort of lift that threshold and then push it out to how long they can hold it? So, as I guess I'm more of a remote coach, I sort of coach many sort of through online programming. It's really important for me to have as much data as I can on exactly what stress I'm applying to my athletes to make sure that I'm not overcooking them as well.
It's really interesting. And I imagine power and pace have some sort of relationship. I guguess all the metrics have some sort of relationship.
I think power and pace are pretty strongly correlated with flat stuff. So particularly like track and, and flat road marathons. If you're optimally trained for that distance and the time it's going to take you to complete it at that power, then yes, they correlate really well. I think where power comes to the fore for me is it's a really good way to quantify work when things aren't dead straight or when things get windy. And so I think, when you're running over undulating terrain, so again, coming back to, more the ultra style of racing, pace is pretty useless when it comes to running up a hill versus down a hill versus you can practice running over those segments of a course and go, well, it took me this long to do it. So, hopefully on race day, I'll be around there. But it's so easy to overdo it in an ultra. I think for me, power is a really good way to act as a limiter of when I need to stop running up a hill and convert to a power hike, or when I need to stop hiking and pull my finger out and start running again. And it's generally not at the top of the hill, which is where a lot of us will go, I'll just walk to the top. So it helps to sort of, I guess, streamline effort in a way that's still sustainable, and it means you're not wasting sort of dead time or losing opportunity, and you're a lot less likely to really overdo it and put yourself in a hole and then hemorrhage time at the end. The one thing that power still sucks at though is sand running. Completely useless, unless you're going to do a specific threshold test on sand and know what your threshold is on sand. But I mean, look, pace is pretty useless on sand too, and so is heart rate. Freaking hurts.
Sand running hurts if it does one thing. So this is me being a massive rookie. How do you sort of track power?
So how do you measure it? No, it's a really good question. It's pretty important. So I guess power from a running perspective, it's always going to be algorithm based, whereas, from a cycling, so power kind of started more in the cycling sphere, and in cycling, you're dealing with a fixed frame object, like the wheel is a certain diameter. And so for power meters for cycling, for me to pull 400 watts is actually going to be the same as Dom to pull 400 watts. Like those watts correlate to the actual bike itself and how quickly you're turning the wheel and the physics of it. For, I guess, and it's probably why it's taken so long for run power to evolve, is that ultimately it is based off algorithms, and there's a few different ways to calculate those algorithms. The one that I sort of trust the most is the stride power meters, which are a foot pod base. So they strap, it just clips onto your laces. And they actually have an inbuilt accelerometer. They're literally measuring the movement of your foot, and so it's a much more accurate indicator for your output when you also enter in inputs like what you weigh and how tall you are. But they've tested that over so many runners now and refined that algorithm that it's actually really quite accurate when it comes to undulating terrain, technical terrain, running uphill, hiking. They've really improved the hiking sort of algorithm as well. So the foot pod pod based power is definitely the sort of the one that's been tested most rigorously and correlates the best with like force plate, treadmill analysis and all of those sorts of things, and threshold and VO2 testing in the lab. There's a lot of wrist-based power coming out now, so a lot of the watch manufacturers are wanting to jump on board with this technology, and there's a few different iterations of that, and they do use quite different algorithms. So some of them, like Polar, tend to run quite high. Their sort of like average power seems to be considerably higher to sort of a stride pod. The one that I've started playing around with a lot more is Coros. Their wrist-based power is actually really quite well correlated to stride. I still haven't tested it as much as I want to on super technical kind of stuff, but for road running now, I'm pretty comfortable just wearing my Coros and not charging my foot pod. The downside of the foot pod is it doesn't love being submerged in rivers.
I can imagine.
Found that out the hard way. So like for the super long stuff, you know, like UTA course where you've got a few river crossings, or like the event that I was sort of race directing at, there's I think 14 river crossings. So it's pretty annoying to have to take something off your foot on and off repeatedly. So wrist-based power is like the ultimate evolution. But I guess we get a lot more metrics out of the foot pod in terms of your actual running form. And that's kind of the other aspect of the data that I look at. It's not just necessarily your power output, it's also what your ground contact time's doing and your leg spring stiffness and a bunch of those other metrics that give us a bit more feedback on how you're actually holding form over the duration of a distance.
Yeah. And I know in cycling, like it's like power to weight is like the main sort of ratio, because bigger people are going to generate more power like naturally.
And it's the same for running. So you will convert that to sort of watts per kg basically. And that is more so for me, like my threshold power is going to be 220 watts, whereas for, you know, another female that weighs a different amount to me, that has been running at different intensities for the last 90 days and is at a different phase of training, their threshold's going to be completely different. But watts per kg is the more equivalent sort of metric that you can sort of apply. Okay.
So it's like, it's the same, I guess, then in cycling, how you kind of break it down. And I was thinking like other metrics, another common one is like blood lactates, which is pretty hard to do, but it's probably, I don't know, the most accurate, or
so that would be the gold standard in terms of figuring out exactly where your lactate threshold is. And VO2 max testing, like with the mask on and things as well, is going to be the lab equivalent of that sort of other threshold. So yes, those are kind of the gold standard, but they're super hard to perform regularly, and they're pretty expensive if you want to book in as a recreational athlete to have those things done regularly. And I think that's what I find is so valuable about the power duration curve model, is that if we're accumulating essentially every time you go for a run with a power meter on, or your watch that's set with the power sort of recording input, you're building out data over that curve. And it's going to continually model and update the model of where your threshold is likely to be relative to the training inputs you've given it. So it's a rolling average of 90 days of training, which is where, you know, when I'm sort of leading into super long stuff and the real top end sort of speed work is going to drop off just because I'm getting a lot more specific, then, you know, my threshold probably will start to drop a little bit on the model, which may not necessarily reflect what I would be truly capable of if I stopped running stupid distances and started focusing on short stuff again. But it's the closest thing we've got to a rolling lab, basically, that's telling you where those thresholds are. But yeah, you're definitely right, Dom. And I think it can still be a really cool tool and I guess a nice way to back up what you think you're doing if you do have an opportunity to do some lab testing. I think it's always a really cool experience.
I think I've only seen the Ingebrigtsen brothers in their training. Like the dad would pull up. I was watching the documentary and he'd pull like this little thing and he like pricks them with and test the threshold.
The lactate.
Like on whatever the I don't know what the reading is, but just to make sure they're staying below or at threshold.
Yeah.
which
So
is
yeah, you can
crazy.
get lactate. It's so a little bit like diabetics use glucose monitoring things. You can get ones that will do lactate that are a bit more specialized, but it means stabbing yourself repeatedly and squeezing out a drop of blood and then reading it and going, oh, okay, cool, but I've definitely dropped because I've had to faff around stabbing myself. So
not the most efficient when you're in a rest period.
It's like really expensive as well. It's like $10 a test or something.
Yeah, so, they're pretty pricey. So I mean, if you've got like sports doctors and a team behind you and funding, then awesome.
But not going to be commonly used, that's for sure. So is the power reading, another rookie question, is it like, I know when I'm training at a specific pace, I'll be looking at my watch, maybe a little bit too much.
It'll link into your watch. Sorry, I might have cut off what the actual question was.
No. That's exactly pretty much it. So you can monitor it on the watch as you're training. Is that what you would?
Yeah, so the stride pods connect with pretty much all of your wrist-based sort of running watches these days, and there'll often be sort of an add-on app that you install that will allow you to view the power output, and you can select how sensitive that is, whether it's like 3 second, 9 second, or I can't remember what the other one is. I tend to sort of roll around that 5 to 9 seconds, depending on your watch make. It allows you to sort of adjust that a little bit more. But you can see real time what your power is doing. And when I'm kind of power programming I train through a program called Training Peaks. If we're building in those actual workouts, I can get it to literally upload the workout to your watch that says run at this bracket, and it'll beep if you're too high or beep if you're too low. Can drive you a little bit crazy, but sometimes it's better just to have the numbers in your brain. But you can get that specific with it now in training.
It's funny you mentioned that, because like, for example, I'll be training a threshold session using heart rate specifically, and it is, like you said, so dependent on many other factors. Like, for example, I'll be running at threshold, it'll be feeling easy, but my heart rate will be 10% or 5% above what it normally is at that pace. So I can see
but I think all of it builds information as to where you're at on that day, and I think that's where, again, the bigger picture is, are these metrics improving your knowledge about yourself? And I think when you're noticing those sorts of discrepancies, it's about having those extra couple of thoughts of, well, what do I think is going on that's causing that right now? Is it that I'm running into a headwind and it is maybe a bit harder? Or is it that I didn't get a good sleep the last couple of nights? Or is it that I'm really worried about something else that's going on in my life? Like there's lots of things that can sort of be impacting that. And so I think with any of these metrics, it always has to come back to giving you more information about where you're at and how that's impacting your training.
Yeah, that's a good point. So
I think that's a really good overview of all running metrics, and good insight into how power is used. So what about I guess strength training? Does that become more important in power, or?
I don't think necessarily relative to a metric. I just think so a wise physio I have worked with once told me he's never met a runner whose calves or glute meads are too strong, and I think that's a really important thing to remember. I think strength training's been really integral to my development as a runner. I didn't come from a running background as a kid. I started running in my 20s. So, for me, I'm a hypermobile, historically quite weak human, and pretty much every barrier to me increasing distance was going to be strength. ITB stuff, like everything came back to me not having the hip stability and strength in my legs to support the volume that I wanted it to support. So I've spent a lot of time in the gym, and I think that was a game changer for me, particularly working into more ultra distances. But I think pretty much every runner will benefit from some form of strength training. But again, I think there probably is a bit of room for periodization within that. If you are sort of at the pointy end of a marathon prep and you're running really well and probably not going to get you doing deadlifts 3 days a week and pushing your 1 rep max. Like, it's probably not going to be conducive to you recovering and being able to actually still do the running volume. But I think, again, early on in a prep, or if you're sort of targeting hillier events or sort of mountain ultras and things, strength training is, I would say, as important as the extra run session. So, you know, I've definitely trained for ultras, just running 4 days a week, but lifting 2 to 3 days a week. And I think it just depends on the terrain and the requirements and your specifics in terms of where your weaknesses are. But yeah, I'm a big advocate of strength training, particularly for, and I do think that there are sex differences, and I think female runners in general will benefit even more from strength training. We don't have the same muscle mass in our legs as guys do, and our hips are wider, and we're a lot more prone to sort of lateral movement when we're landing. So really strengthening up sort of that hip support and being able to direct as much force forwards rather than losing momentum sideways. It's just going to improve your running even more, and guys would 100% benefit from that too. There's plenty of sort of hip drop and weird movements going on with a lot of people sort of running that, if you're strengthening everything up to support forward motion, you're going to see improved performance.
So strength, it seems like it kind of ties in with technique and efficiency. Have you got any cues or ideas on what you want to see in good running technique? Or
I think there's sort of your sort of archetypal perfect kind of running style that we keep trying to chase and quantify. I think in general, you want to be landing underneath your sort of body and not necessarily sort of falling into the real heel striking or toe striking kind of position. But it really depends on how long you've been doing that for, and is it working for you? I think, again, what I hit a lot with the sort of athletes that I'm training, who are generally, adult recreational runners that aren't necessarily people who have run since school, the motor patterns that they've acquired them for 30 years. And if we go tweaking things, there's a good chance we're going to create issues in that process. So there's not many things I touch unless it's causing them problems. If someone's coming to me with recurrent injuries, then we need to sort of look at biomechanics. And that's something that I will always be recommending, is performed in the hands of someone with higher training. So that's where I'm referring them to the running room and Paddy or like an exercise phys to sort of assess gait. The main thing that I'll tweak is going to be cadence. I think, there's obviously been a lot of sort of hype around, a particular number of 180 being the perfect running number. I don't think that that's necessarily true, but I think somewhere in that ballpark is important. And if someone's coming to me with a cadence of 156 sort of steps per minute, then there's an excellent chance they're going to run more efficiently if we can increase their cadence. We're going to reduce their ground contact time, so they're spending less time on the ground and more time in the air, which means they're probably going to be propulsing themselves forward. So there's things that I will tweak, and cadence is probably the big one. Everything else I'm generally going to leave to someone with more expertise in that field, but I'm really only going to push them that way if there's an injury issue or potentially a barrier to peak performance, and they're prepared to do the work to learn how to move in a different way and give that time. Because if you're going to start changing biomechanics, you probably are looking at more like a 6 to 12 month adaptation to really get used to that new motor patterning. So, thinking I'm just going to tweak my running form in my rest recovery month after doing a marathon and then go straight back into a marathon prep and run perfectly is probably not a realistic objective.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, like, would cadence affect power? So say, because I don't know, it seems logical that if you're taking less steps and longer, that the power would be increased, but I don't know.
It can definitely have a role. So it's more though, another sort of metric that we use, which is running efficacy, or RE, which is where, so that's sort of, I guess, more an overall metric for how efficiently you are running. And there's lots of things that feed into that, including cadence and ground contact time and leg spring stiffness and all of those sorts of things. So cadence is probably more directly linked to RE, and that will influence the pace you're achieving with the power that you're holding. So there is definitely some nuance in there, and that's something that we've worked with Nico as well. So his cadence was sort of at the lower end, and we've kind of worked to increase that gradually, and that's generally increased his running efficacy. I don't know why I can't say that word today. So it generally converts to more efficient use of that power, which is going to lead to him moving quicker.
Yeah, wow. So it's like, it's not just power that you're looking at. You're looking at all these other
things.
Yeah, that's crazy. It
Yeah,
sounds like
there's some pretty full-on software that dives super deep and deeper than I have the knowledge on. Like, there's so much more I would love to dive into when I get some time in life. But yeah, there's some really cool stuff we can do with data these days, when we're really targeting performance. And I think, you know, the road runners that I enjoy working with are probably runners that are a bit more experienced and looking to improve on performance, because that's the fun bit from a data perspective for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, sounds like to be honest, when I first heard about power, I was like, oh, I don't know about power. Like, just seems like, I don't know, you got pace. Why would you worry about power when you got pace?
Yeah.
But like, it's grown on me a lot, and I think that there's definitely a lot of use for it. Yeah, especially
I think
if you.
so. Yeah, I think it's just sort of getting your head around it. This isn't like some magic cure of, I'm just going to run to this number and I'm going to be a perfect runner and run whatever pace I'm trying to achieve. Like, it is just another tool, but I guess just because it correlates so well with everything else we've been trying to model with those other metrics, that's where I find it most powerful. And yeah, I've really enjoyed working with it.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's offered some really good insights into yourself and the athletes that you coach. Yeah, I guess, like, moving away from the analytics, what was like some of the influences that sort of affected your coaching philosophy? Was there anyone in particular, or
I think lots of people. I mean, probably my coach. So Nathan Fenton has coached me for a number of years. I'm not sort of on formal training at the moment because I've sort of had a bit of a break. But Nathan and I worked together a lot earlier on in my running development, and I think we both learned a lot from that in terms of managing load, and you know, a lot of my philosophies in terms of the metrics that I use to track load in athletes, and particularly the power. So Nathan was a really early adopter of power, and so I've learned a huge amount from him. I think it's important to sort of take notes from you know, those historic sort of coaches like your Lydiards and Jack Daniels and Canova. And I guess in terms of sort of really broad programming structure, I probably gravitate more towards a kind of approach, particularly with things like marathon preps. But you know, I think really what I learned the most from is, and what refines that overarching philosophy the most for me, is the athletes that I'm dealing with. I think what I really enjoy about coaching is developing those relationships with clients and figuring out what it is that's actually going to work for that specific person, how they respond to those specific kinds of training. And so I think for me, the broader overarching philosophy is to optimize running consistency and longevity. Like, for me, it's an injury minimization game, and I'm still super keen to help people chase really big goals. But I think the overarching sort of thing for me is that we need to be doing it in a way that's respecting our bodies and where we're at, and being in tune with our bodies while we're doing it, because it's very easy to fall off that cliff and I've fallen off that cliff a lot of times. I've fallen off an actual cliff too. But but yeah, I think, you know, it comes back to being in tune with your body in training, and that doesn't mean, you know, not pushing, but I think it's finding ways to push hard in a way that's going to optimize our longer term health and running performance.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, and yeah, really insightful. I guess wrapping it up a bit, there's a question we've been asking everyone who's come on the show. What's your favorite race that you've ever done and why? Yeah, we've had
so many.
There seems to be like a 10-second lag when we ask that
I
question,
know.
because like
Yeah.
memories are flashing.
I think, I mean, the big one for me is probably going to have been my first 100. So I did Surf Coast Century in 2015. So down in Victoria, sort of on the Great Ocean Road kind of area of Victoria. And I don't think I realized at the time just how good a day I had. It was wonderful. I was like, yeah, I was grinning the whole time. I ran really well. I really loved that day, and that finish line still gives me goosebumps. But, you know, I think I almost value as much, you know, races. So like my first DNF, which was UTA a couple of years ago, so many things, you know, went wrong, and I've learned so much from that experience. I think, yeah, there's lots of favorites, but I'd have to say Surf Coast Century.
Yeah, absolutely. I think ultra running is pretty special. Like, you learn so much about yourself. Like,
so much. Just about life, man.
I know.
Ultra running is life in a day.
Yeah, I never thought I would ever be an ultra runner, but yeah, even I've only done one race, but it was like, yeah, life changing. You just think in different ways, and
yeah,
it's awesome. But anyways, yeah, that's so cool. Thanks for coming on there, Sally. It's been a pleasure to chat to you and learn a little bit more about power and how you approach your coaching. I think that, yeah, you're one of the people who I look up to a lot, and I think you offer a really unique perspective on coaching.
Thanks,
there's not too many people who really dig into the analytics and the data behind running. I think most coaches are more kind of just a bit more touchy-feely and kind of listen to their athletes and just go off like what they're telling them, rather than actually looking at behind the curtain and seeing how the machine's functioning.
Yeah, and I think like I definitely enjoy the data side of things, but I enjoy the psychological things as much, and I think there's a lot behind those curtains too that's really cool to sort of dig into with people, and you earn a lot of people's trust through that too. So yeah, it definitely cuts both ways for me with coaching. I really get a lot out of it, and yeah, I just hope that my athletes do too. But super grateful to come on. Thanks for having me on. It's been really cool to, I guess, just chat about running. It's always my favorite thing. If I'm not running, let's talk about it.
Yes. Oh, thanks, Sally.
Cool. Well, yeah, all the best with your next endeavors. I look forward to tracking them on the socials and the potty.
Yeah, likewise. Hopefully we'll see you at Black All's 100.
Yeah, bring it.